So let's move ahead to the next question of optimistic and pessimistic locking video series. What is optimistic locking and how we can achieve it? In our previous video we saw that what are the various issues that are caused because of concurrency problems, and then we also talked about optimistic and pessimistic locking. Now what we'll do in this video is we'll try to understand that what are the various ways by which we can do optimistic locking. So what we'll do is we'll look into the three important ways of doing optimistic locking in this videos. One is by using dataset, which has an inbuilt capability of doing optimistic locking. Second is we'll create a timestamp column on the table and we'll try to see that how we can achieve optimistic locking. And third is we can also talk about the check of old and new values by which we can achieve optimistic locking. So before we move ahead, first let's try to understand that what is optimistic locking exactly. As mentioned previously, optimistic locking does not do locking at all. What it does is basically it just alerts that has the data been modified from the time you fetched it. So in other words, if the data has been modified from the time you fetched it, that means that somebody else has changed the value. So any optimistic methodology, any optimistic locking methodology, it's either by using data sets or it's either by using link queue, entity framework, timestamp, old values, new values, whatever it is. They do four important steps. Step one, they keep a snapshot of the old data. So the time you start updating the data, you keep one snapshot with you somewhere in memory, because you would like to check that if the values have been modified or not. Then second step, you start modifying the values. So you start setting the values whatever you want to set. Now when you go to the database to finally do update, what you do is basically you check if your snapshot or if your old values are the same as what is there currently in the database. If they are different, that means somebody else has gone and changed the value, and in other words there has been a concurrency violation. So you would like to either roll back the data or you would like to send an alert to the user saying that somebody else has changed the value. Are you sure you want to continue? In case if the data is not changed and everything is fine, then you can go ahead and commit the values. So in other words, any optimistic methodology, however you implement optimistic methodology, the checking of the old values and new values will happen. Must be that it will happen sometimes by using timestamp, must be that it will happen sometimes by using the actual values, whatever it is, but the check has to happen. So you can really see that optimistic is not a locking. It's just a check which you do, saying that has anybody modified the value or has anybody changed the data. So you can think about optimistic value, optimistic locking is like a prevention. It's alertness. It's not exactly locking. So now that we understood what is optimistic locking, the next step is that what are the various ways of implementing optimistic locking. Now there are three ways by which we can do it. One is by using ADO.NET dataset, which has an inbuilt capability of doing optimistic locking. Second is by, you can go ahead and you can create and record a timestamp field on your table, and you can take that timestamp field for checking the value. And the third one is you can use the old values and new values check. So let's go step by step and let's actually see some demos of how we can actually implement optimistic locking in .NET. So let's start with the first method of implementing optimistic locking, that is by using dataset. Now dataset by itself has built-in optimistic locking capability. Now in order to demonstrate that, what we'll do is, here's a simple table I have called as TBL items, and it has a couple of fields over here. And what we'll do is we'll try to change this first row, that is 1001. So we'll try to change the author name value to must be something new value over here, and this we will be changing by using dataset. So you can see that over here I have written a simple code where basically this code fires a simple command object and it pulls up the dataset object, and in the dataset object what we are doing is we are trying to go and change the value, and we are trying to call the update method. Now in order to demonstrate optimistic locking, what we'll do is we'll run this code and we have put a breakpoint here and we'll stop this code over here. And what I will do is I'll go at the backend and I will change the value here from the SQL Server Management Studio, and then I will try to run this code further, and we should get a concurrency exception error. So let's start with the demo. So here's my application which is up and running. So let me click on the dataset optimistic button over here. So we go step by step. We first open the connection, we select the row 1001, we open a data set, we bind it with the adapter and we fill it, and now we go and update the author name with some new name. And now we are on the update command, but we will not be firing the update command. So what we'll do is I'll go sneakingly at the back end and I will change this value to new Shiv. Okay, now let's go and fire this update command further, and you can see that it has basically popped up an exception saying DB concurrency exception error. So in other words, what it is saying is that somebody else has changed the value from the backend. So in other words, data set does optimistic locking by itself. Also what I've done is, when I was firing that update command, I also ran the SQL Server profile at the backend to see what exactly dataset does. So if you can see that over here, this is the dataset command what it is firing, and what it is really doing is basically that it is checking for the old and the new value. So you can see that basically it is checking that has the old and the new values changed. In case they have changed, then it sends out a flag at the ADO.NET client side saying that basically there is an error. So in other words, in case when you're doing an update from a data set or from the adapter, basically what happens is it does check for the old and the new value, and thus it supports optimistic locking by itself. So now this was one way of doing optimistic locking, that is by using data set. The other way of doing optimistic locking is by using timestamp column of SQL Server. Let's try to demonstrate that how we can use the timestamp column to do optimistic locking. In professional projects, people do not prefer to use data sets, at least for doing updates. So they either want to go via stored procedures, or they either want to basically use the command object. Now when you're using the command object, data set is completely out of picture. So in other words, when you're firing update command via the command object, or when you are actually writing update command in a stored procedure, the command object is only that comes into picture. For those kind of scenarios, you can use other way of doing optimistic locking, and that is called as the timestamp way. So what you can do is basically you can go and create a field on a table with a timestamp data type as you're seeing on your screen. Now the timestamp data type, when you create a field using a timestamp data type, what happens is any updates you do on that row, the timestamp, the field which is defined by the timestamp data type auto updates itself with a unique binary value. So with every update every user does on the row, the timestamp data type update itself with a unique value. So what you can do is basically before updating the actual value, you can select the old timestamp, make the changes on your ASP.NET code, and when you actually go to update it, what you will do is you will check that if the old timestamp and the current timestamp in the database are equal or not. If they are not equal, then you will throw up an error. So let's try to understand that how we can do this by using timestamp column. So here's a simple stored procedure which handles optimistic locking. So I have a simple stored procedure here called as update TBL items, and what I'm doing here is whenever I'm firing the update query right from the stored procedure, I'm checking that if the current timestamp and the old timestamps are equal or not. So you can see that in my input parameters I'm passing the old timestamp value. So in other words, when I started this update, I had already selected the old timestamp, and when I'm actually doing the update, when the actual update starts, I'm basically just checking if the current timestamp is equal to the old timestamp. In case this value is not equal, what will happen is your @ row count value will be 0. In other words, there will be no updated rows. And in case if the rows are not updated, then basically what you can do is you can raise an error here, a serious error from SQL Server saying, whatever it is. At this moment I'm just saying that hello, someone else has changed the value and with the severity of 16. So in other words, by using the timestamp column, what you do is that just before the update or while doing the update, you check if the old timestamp and the current timestamp are equal or not. Now what we'll do is that we will consume this stored procedure in our ASP.NET code, and let's try to see that how these things will work. So here's the application which is running, and there's a simple button here saying optimistic using timestamp. So let me just click on it. Now what I've done is I've used a command object, and I'm calling the same stored procedure which I discussed just previously, that is update TBL items. So if you remember the stored procedure, update TBL items, where basically we had made a check of the current timestamp and the old timestamp. So I'm calling the same stored procedure via my command object here. Now what I've done is I'm not executing the execute non-query here. I've just put a debug point and I've stopped here. Now what I'll do is I'll go at the back end and I'll change the value. So let me go to my TBL item.